Okay, all right. Well, today we're going to talk about another saint, aren't we? Another great and lively young saint, Blessed Pier Giorgio Frassati. Pier Giorgio Frassati is sort of the number one saint for young people right now in the church, especially for young people, not only boys, teenagers, but boys in their 20s and young men. And young women look to him too as a patron saint, and they pray that they might find a young guy like him, perhaps, that they could marry and have a family with, someone who would be a loyal friend and a true disciple of Jesus, and a husband who would be always honor and care for his family and sacrifice himself for them. Pier Giorgio Frassati, for those of you that don't know, was Italian, and he was born in Turin, Italy, in the north of Italy, near where they have the shroud, the burial garment of Jesus that has the marks of his body on it. He was born on April 6th in 1901, which that year was a Holy Saturday. So he wasn't baptized until the Monday of Easter. He had one sister who was born a year later on the 18th of August. His parents were very good people, but they weren't very religious. They went to Mass maybe twice or three times a year, but they really didn't care much about religion. But he did make his first communion when he was 9 years old on the 11th of June in the Church of Corpus Domini in Turin. And he made a second first communion, what they call a solemn communion, a year later in the chapel of some sisters who were his teachers. Pier Giorgio was a very lively boy. He was very happy. He loved to play. He loved to be around people. But he didn't always pay attention in school. He found his schooling hard. So when he was 12, he failed the exams that he had to sit. And so his mom and dad decided to send him to a private school so that he could have a stronger education. And this was a school run by the Jesuit fathers. So he had a daily interaction with priests, and he learned more about his faith and about prayer and about how faith influences our whole life. And because of the Jesuit fathers' involvement with the school, Pier Giorgio became a very religious boy, even while he was still the heart of every game, the best friend to everyone around him, and the life of the party, we might say. In 1913, his dad became a senator in the Kingdom of Italy, and so that was an important role in the government. In 1914, when Pier Giorgio was 13, he joined the Apostleship of Prayer. And the Apostleship of Prayer was a prayer league for boys and girls and grown-ups. And as part of belonging to the Apostleship of Prayer, you would begin every morning with a special prayer called the Morning Offering. And it was a way of beginning your day and offering everything that you did to Jesus. Everything that you did. That's my cat. He's sitting on my back. She likes to do this when I'm talking out of my computer. So now that you've met her, her name is Cookie, by the way. She's heard the story of Pier Giorgio, but she'll listen in. So Pier Giorgio decided that every morning he would say this prayer and to offer his day to God, all of his joys and happinesses, all of the sorrows and the difficulties, everything about the day. He said, Lord, I want this to be a gift to you and a prayer. So that became a characteristic of his whole life. He also joined the Society of the Blessed Sacrament, which meant that he promised to go to church even just for 5 minutes a day to make a visit to Jesus in the Blessed Sacrament. That was another one of his special obligations and things that he wanted to do, but he made it a daily practice that he would make an extra visit to Jesus. Later on in life, he used to tell his friends who were surprised that he would go to Mass every single day, and try to go to church again later in the afternoon. He said, in the morning, Jesus comes to me, and he comes into my heart in Holy Communion, and he promises to spend the whole day with me. So I spend my day with him by saying this prayer and giving him everything that I do. And then in the afternoon, I visit Jesus in the sick. I visit Jesus in the sick. What does that mean? Well, you know how we're supposed to see Jesus in everybody around us. Pier Giorgio really did that. And he looked at people who were sick or suffering or poor with very special respect. And he said, Jesus is in them in a very special way. And I want to always remember that. In 15, he received the Sacrament of Confirmation. Now, the picture that you can see of him now is one of my favorites. That's Pier Giorgio when he was in college. And he's with some of his college friends. In those days, men dressed up to go to college. They didn't wear jeans or t-shirts or even raggedy or clothes that you might wear on a day off. They wore suits and ties. So there you see Pier Giorgio, and he's leaning with his hand on the shoulder of a friend of his, and he has a priest friend on the other side and several other men, and you can see him laughing. And he's laughing with real gusto, with real enjoyment. He had a very deep laugh, and his laughter was infectious. It made other people laugh too. So he was the kind of fellow that other boys always wanted to be around. Other guys wanted to be with him. And because he loved to cycle, he loved to play soccer, he loved to ski, and he loved to swim, he was certainly in the center of all kinds of activities. In 1918, when he was 17 years old, he decided after graduating from high school that he would join an industrial mechanical engineering class and train to be a mining engineer. That's what he thought his career would be. His dad, you remember, I said, was already in politics and would also become an ambassador to Berlin the next year. But Pier Giorgio thought that he could do a lot of good by helping out men who worked in the mines. Miners digging coal and other ores had very difficult jobs, and they were very prone to accidents and to getting killed on the job. Pier Giorgio thought he could use his talents to help them have a better life. He wanted to be married and have a family himself, but he wanted to make life better for other families. And so that's why he began his studies in engineering. It was difficult for him, though, to set his mind to the books. And so what he used to do to study for exams was put little notes, like Post-it notes, all over his shaving mirror, so that when he was washing his face, shaving, brushing his teeth in the morning, he could look over all these chemical formulas and names that he was meant to memorize. So I'll bet some of you do things like that too. You take notes and maybe you stick them up in your room or on your bulletin board or on your computer so that you can remember things and work on things. That's a pretty good habit. You ask me whether I'm in good spirits. How could I not be so? As long as faith gives me strength, I will always be joyful. Pier Giorgio wrote these words to a friend of his in a letter, and that picture was taken of him when he was about 17 years old, when he just went to the engineering school. You can see he's not wearing a tie and jacket. He's got an open neck shirt on, so he's at home. And he's free from school, but he was writing letters. And so this quotation is a really good one. Pier Giorgio's family was fairly wealthy, but sometimes he suffered a great deal because his mom and dad didn't always get along. And so the household that he grew up in wasn't peaceful. He and his sister stuck together when times were difficult, and he always prayed that his mom and dad would get along better and that they would have a strong family life and a good Catholic marriage. And after he died, his prayers were heard. Just like Rolando, who prayed for his father not to take revenge, so Pier Giorgio, from his place in heaven, actually strengthened his mother and father's marriage. And so the rest of their lives were very happy indeed. Now, while Pier Giorgio was in his college taking his mining course, he joined the St. Vincent de Paul Society, and he joined a Catholic students group. Now, the St. Vincent de Paul Society is a group of people, groups of men or ladies, who work together in parishes to take care of people who are poor. They don't wait for a big outside organization to do it. They do it themselves. Remember I said that Pier Giorgio liked to visit the poor? He would visit them in the afternoon, and he told his friends that that was a way of visiting Jesus. Well, he started doing that visiting with the Society of St. Vincent de Paul. We have St. Vincent de Paul societies here in Vancouver, and they also run thrift stores. Do you know what a thrift store is? A thrift store is a shop that has things that are donated. And these donated clothes and furniture and books and toys and all sorts of things are so that poor people who don't have as much money as others can still get good things and nice things to wear. And the people who work in the store usually volunteer, or sometimes they're people who are poor themselves, but they work there for a little salary. The store is not meant to make a profit. The store is just meant to take care of the poor. We have 3 or 4 of them in Vancouver, and they're really popular. And people make all kinds of nice donations to them. Maybe your family has done that. And then they help the pastors so that if there's a family in a parish that has had a bad time, or maybe everyone's lost their job or something like that, the local St. Vincent de Paul Society tries to go and visit and bring things, but always they do it with great respect for people. You know, when we do somebody a favor, when we do something kind for somebody else, we always have to do it very respectfully. That was something that Pier Giorgio learned very young in life, and he always practiced. He would always look people in the face, smile at them, acknowledge them as persons before giving them any alms or anything to help them. Because he knew that our sense of self-respect, our dignity, is one of the most important things that a man or woman has. You need to remember that as you grow up. And it can help us because remembering who we are, who God made us to be, helps us not to fall into sins. I mean, sometimes we don't do the wrong thing because other people are there to see us. And we don't want to do anything wrong in front of people because we get embarrassed. But part of growing up and maturing is doing the right thing even when no one's around to see you do it. So when Pier Giorgio did good for other people, quite often he would do it in a way that nobody knew it was him. And when he did do something personally for someone, he always did it in a way that made them feel they were just as important, just as respected, just as loved by God as he was himself. That's something for you guys to keep in mind too, and maybe talk about in your discussion sessions. You know, how can I be kind to others in the best way? How can I be respectful even when I'm doing something for someone else? You know, sometimes, for instance, at Christmas time, you see people on the street who are collecting money for the Salvation Army, or maybe for some other charity, and maybe your mom gives you a quarter or $1 and says, go and put that in the can. When you do that, always look at the person who's collecting the money or ringing the bell or standing there. Look at them and say, Merry Christmas. Smile at them and then put your coin in. That's the way we do things respectfully. And Pier Giorgio is really a model of that. Well, now this next picture I'm going to tell you about and I'm it's a little bit out of order, a little bit early, but it's good that I tell you about it now so that we have time. This picture shows, that's me on the left. Most of you know what I look like. But you know who that lady is? That is Blessed Pier Giorgio's sister. That is Luciana Frassati. And I am talking to her in 2007. What year was she born? August 18th, 1902. She was almost 105 years old. And I got to meet her in Rome. And she was bright and talkative and just as smart as anybody who was 50 years younger. We met for a whole day, and I got to have lunch with her and her daughter, Wanda. Wanda is Pier Giorgio's niece, and she's a great promoter of him for sainthood. And in fact, Luciana wrote many books about her brother. So a lot of the personal things that we know and the access to his letters and his notes that were kept at home all comes through her, because she was convinced that her brother really was a saint and that he had a message for young people. Young people often have great ideals. They want to do big things, important things. They want to make the world a better place. And she wanted to explain how Pier Giorgio did that. He was really strong in fighting against communism and against fascism when he was a college student. He joined the Catholic school groups and unions and societies so that he could help to build up Catholic education so that young men and women would become good and important and productive members of society. There you can see Luciana. She's holding a book that she wrote on Pier Giorgio to show me. I had most of her books. She was very happy when she was telling me about her writing. I could say to her in Italian, I have this book and this book and this book and this book. And she was really pleased. And then she gave me a book that I didn't have, and that made her happy. It was a book called A Chronology of His Life. What's a chronology? A chronology is when you write a book about somebody by making a list of all the dates in his life when something kind of important happened. So she had a chronology of Pier Giorgio's life in which she took 365 events that she pulled out from his 24 years, and then she made a book about them where she put them all into one 12-month period. So just like you can pick up a book that's the calendar of the saints and know who the saint is for each day, she gave us a book on what Pier Giorgio had done during every different day of the year. Now, some of those events were really important events, and they were kind of public, and they had a resonance, an effect on other people. But other events that she wrote down were very simple. I visited this family today. I brought 3 bags of groceries, 2 bags of medicine, and then there was a little note, remember next time, bring warm socks for the children and a blanket for the baby. Little things like that that showed that Pier Giorgio wanted to plan out his charities so that what he gave really was important for a family and had a good effect on them. So that was one of the great pleasures of my life. Here we are looking through the chronology book. It's really amazing, isn't it, to read the life, to meet the sister of a saint. Now, this picture of Pier Giorgio was hanging in her living room, and this is a snapshot that I took of it. He's mountain climbing. So he's standing on a mountain with a group of his friends, and one of the friends that went up mountain climbing with him was a priest. And so all of the other boys who were climbing with him, all the other college students, carried up a mass kit and a table that folded up that could become an altar, and all of Father's vestments. And so when they got to the top, And they set up this altar in a place where the wind wasn't blowing hard. Then they had Holy Mass. And in this picture, Pier Giorgio is standing looking at the altar and praying. You can see his mouth is open because he's saying some of the prayers of the Mass, but his eyes are looking down because the altar is actually lower than he is. So he's looking onto the altar at Jesus in the Blessed Sacrament. Luciana really loved this picture, and even though it's not the best photograph of her brother, she thought it was the kind of picture that made him really alive to her. So even after so many years, she kept this picture. Pier Giorgio, when he was mountain climbing, always made sure he got to Mass, and if he was staying up in ski country for a few days, if there weren't Mass where they were staying, he would come down the mountain, hike down, and then he would go back to go to Mass. So in this picture, you can see him rock climbing, and that's his handwriting on the picture. Verso l'alto. That means towards the top, towards the high places. And that was kind of a motto for Pier Giorgio. He not only wanted to get to the tops of mountains, he wanted to get to the tops of God's mountain. He wanted to get to heaven. He was always going for the highest and the best. In 1920, his father was appointed ambassador to Berlin. So Pier Giorgio took some time off from school and went to live in Berlin with his father. And there he got to understand how people in other countries, other Catholic young people, were getting involved in politics and how they were trying to make a better future and a Catholic world. In 1922, he joined the Third Order Dominicans. Now, the Dominicans are an order of priests in the church. We have them in Vancouver over on St. Mary's Church on Joyce Street, near the SkyTrain station. The Dominicans wear white and black, a white robe and a black cape. They also help young people and older people who are living in the world to share in their prayer life and their spirit. And they call this being a Third Order Dominican. It's kind of like being an honorary member of the order, even though you might be married and have a family, or wanting to get married and have a family. So what it meant for Pier Giorgio was that every day he said certain Dominican prayers. And every week he went to the Dominican church for Mass at least once and to be with the rest of the community. And then once a month, they would have a special prayer meeting. So Pier Giorgio really loved being part of the Dominican family. He thought that was really important for his life. Now, it was that year too, I believe, that Pier Giorgio's sister, Luciana, got married. And could we flash back to the photograph of the crucifix, gentlemen? There. In Luciana's living room, when I met her, was this framed crucifix. Now, it didn't have glass on it, because the crucifix is 3D. And the figure of Jesus is made out of ivory. So this is very old. We don't use ivory for art anymore, but in the 1700s and 1800s, people made very exquisite pieces of art out of ivory. Ivory, of course, is the tusks of elephants. So somebody made this Jesus on the cross out of ivory. The cross is wood, but the figure is ivory. And Pier Giorgio bought it in an antique shop, and he gave it to his sister for her wedding present. And he said, I want you to take this with you to your new home so that Jesus will bless your home and the family that you have. And Luciana kept it always with her. Wherever she went, she kept the crucifix. And so I got to see it. Now you can see perhaps hanging on the frame, there's a rosary with white beads. That was given to Luciana by Pope John Paul II. He loved Pier Giorgio. He thought he was a wonderful, wonderful man. And he said that he was an inspiration to him when he read his biography as a seminarian and a young priest. So, Pier Giorgio came back to Italy from Germany, went on with his studies, went on with his religious life and his works of charity, and encouraged his friends always to stay close to God. In 1924, he founded a group of friends whom he called the Tipiloski. Tipiloski means the shady characters. Now, shady means bad guys. But of course, Pier Giorgio and his friends weren't bad guys. They were just young guys who loved to have fun, but who also loved to do good things. They were all men that could go to mass together, they could say the rosary together, and they could mountain climb, they could hike, they could ski, they could do all sorts of things, but their faith was truly important. In June of that year, June of 1924, Pier Giorgio's grandmother became very ill, and the whole family focused on taking care of her. At the same time, he started not to feel well, and he didn't know why. He thought he had a flu. And it was really hard for him. He felt like his legs were getting stiff. He was having trouble breathing, but everybody was paying attention to his grandmother, and his mother said, "Look, you're healthy. You're a strong young man. Don't be a baby." Nobody knew that Pier Giorgio was actually very sick. He had contracted poliomyelitis. And polio at that time was a disease that was only really starting to be studied, and there wasn't yet a vaccine for it. And so the illness took over, and soon he was paralyzed. The last time he got out of bed was to drag himself on the floor down the corridor of his house to see his grandmother just before she died. And then he had to be carried back to bed by the servants in the house and died. He died only after a short time later, after 6 days of terrible suffering. His parents, his sister couldn't imagine how their beautiful boy became so sick and died so quickly because he was such a strong man, such an athlete. His mother was so afraid that he might be really sick, she actually didn't want the priest to come. And that was really hard for him because no matter what he said to her, he couldn't get her to allow a priest to come to the house. The Archbishop of Turin came, bringing a relic of one of the saints to bless him with, to help him to get better. And Pier Giorgio's mother sent him away. Finally, when the doctors told her that there was no hope that he was going to live, she allowed a priest to come who gave Pier Giorgio the last sacraments and the anointing of the sick. The very last thing that he was able to do before he died was to scratch a note in really bad handwriting because his hand was becoming paralyzed. And it said to one of his friends, "Go to my dresser, open this drawer, and bring this medication to so-and-so, a sick person. He needs it. And go to the pharmacy, please, and pay my bill." That was the last thing that he could communicate, and it was care for others. 10,000 people showed up for Pier Giorgio's funeral and to pray by his body. His family couldn't imagine it. They didn't know he had all these friends. They didn't know that his reputation was so great. They just thought he was their big kind of dumb son. They didn't have any idea of who he really was. But that opened their eyes. And when they saw all of this grief and all of this mourning, they knew that there was a mystery in him that they hadn't recognized. As the years went on after Pier Giorgio's death, there were many people who wanted him made a saint. But because there was another world war, as you remember, the Second World War, things got delayed. In the 1950s, his case for sainthood started again and stopped again. But Pope Paul VI, when he was elected in 1963, was very favorable to Pier Giorgio becoming a saint because he had actually met him as a young man at a college meeting in northern Italy. So Luciana talked to Pope Paul VI, and had him reopen the case. Here's a picture of Pier Giorgio's funeral. You can see the casket is being carried on the shoulders of some of his closest friends, whom he chose to be his pallbearers. And you can see that all the men in the picture are all young men. They're college students. They're his friends from skiing, from mountain climbing, from hiking, from the political clubs that he joined, from the Catholic Action Society. This picture is a good illustration of how much he was loved and how much he was grieved. In 1981, because his case for sainthood was going on really well at that time, his tomb was opened in the family crypt and cemetery so that his body could be put into a coffin that would be safe. Because usually when someone has been buried or entombed for so long, not only does the body fall to pieces, but the coffin becomes very damaged. And so they wanted to replace the coffin, make sure that his bones were safe, and then be ready to take them into a church when he would be named a saint. But when they opened the casket, 56 years after his death, he looked just like this. This picture was taken at the time of his wake, when he had just died. But when they opened the coffin 56 years later, he looked the same. His skin was completely intact and handsome, and even his clothing hadn't completely fallen away. His body was redressed. His family got to see him, and among the people who got to see him were one of his nephews, a great nephew, excuse me. And that great nephew wasn't even born when Pier Giorgio died. And now Pier Giorgio was dead 56 years, and he still looked like a young man. And the grandnephew was over 50, and he looked older than his dead uncle. God did that as a miracle to point out that Pier Giorgio's life wasn't over when he died. He went to heaven. And sometimes our Lord does that for some of his special saints. And he wanted to do that for Pier Giorgio, we think too, because Pier Giorgio was a man who loved having a body. He loved to be physical. You know, he exercised, he did all these physical activities, he loved sports, mountain climbing, and he used his body not only because he wanted to be strong, but he used his body to serve the poor, to go to difficult places, to clean homes that had no one to take care of them, to carry bundles of groceries, to repair buildings. All of these things, he used the talents of his mind, the talents of his heart, and the talents of his muscles to carry out. So that's important because, you know, each of us is different. Some of us do most of our work with our heads. We're in offices, or we teach school, or we write books, or we do things like that. And that's what we're best suited for. Others of us are more physical guys. My dad was a police officer. My uncles all worked physical jobs for the city. One of them was a head gardener at a cemetery. One of them used to lay hot top for roads, you know, and do all kinds of physical labors like that. We all have talents, and we use our different talents in God's service. Now, this is Pier Giorgio's tomb. The painting of him was done by his mother. That picture of him looking very casual in a wool jacket with one hand in his pocket, that was painted by his mother, who was a gifted painter. And the front of the altar, underneath the lace there, that is where his casket is. So that altar is 6 feet long, or a little bit more, and his casket is behind that screen. And the screen, as you see, has a painting behind it of flowers and roses. And that's there in front of his body with his name. So you can see that that's the shrine that you visit in Turin. Here are young people from the United States praying on pilgrimage and visiting Pier Giorgio's tomb. And that's a Franciscan friar of the Renewal from New York, who is wearing the gray Franciscan habit. And next to him, near the confessional, you can see a sister with a white veil. She's a sister of life from the United States. And they're there with young people to bring them on pilgrimage to Pier Giorgio and to ask Pier Giorgio to bless them and inspire them and watch over them. Isn't that a neat picture? One day, maybe after COVID's over and you're able to travel, you'll go to Turin and you'll be able to pray at his tomb. For World Youth Day one year, when it was held in Australia, Pier Giorgio's family even gave permission for his body to be taken from the tomb in a casket, and they enclosed it in an even stronger wooden casket and brought him all the way to Australia so that the people in Australia, the young people from all over the world, could have this saint, one of their own, in their midst. Wasn't that neat? So now Pier Giorgio is known and loved all over the world. If you want to find out more about him, there's a terrific website called Frassati USA. Frassati USA. And they have not only lots of information about him, but they have a bookstore that you can order medals and books and pamphlets and prayer books from that would be really neat for you to have so that you can have him be part of your spiritual life every day. So I think there it is. Wonderful. And there's a newsletter they send out. St. John Paul II called him the man of the 8 Beatitudes because he said, Blessed Pier Giorgio helps us to live the gospel so powerfully. And here you've got some of the articles on him, pictures of him. That picture on the right shows St. John Paul II kneeling and praying at his old tomb in the family cemetery. And the picture on the left shows him mountain climbing. And in the middle, Pier Giorgio is on the right, wearing a cap, and he's honoring the bishop who's under the canopy, and he's marching with all of his fellow college students. So there's lots you can read about, lots you can enjoy about Pier Giorgio Frassati, and this site is a great way of doing it. So I've gone over 12 minutes again, guys. So you have to forgive me. I say a mea culpa. You know what that is? Mea culpa is the Latin for what we say in the English Mass, through my fault, through my most grievous fault. So sometimes if you hear someone say, I'm saying a mea culpa, it means I'm sorry. Because I think you have a break after I talk for a while.
No,
so
it's a happy fault for us, Father. That was a great talk. So
thank you guys.
Thank you so much for sharing just a lot of great insights into such an inspiring saint for these boys. So
my joy. Here